In the autumn of 1834, hidden within the mist-covered hills of rural Pennsylvania, a discovery was made that would forever change our understanding of human resilience and courage. 31 children, ages ranging from 4 to 17, had vanished over the course of a decade, only to be found alive against all odds thanks to the tireless efforts of the Morrison family. What started as a simple search for one missing child uncovered a network of underground chambers beneath an abandoned church where the most vulnerable members of society had been hidden away. The local newspaper accounts, sealed for nearly a century in the Lancaster County Archives, described scenes so miraculous that even hardened investigators were moved to tears. What makes this case truly remarkable isn't just the horror of what these children endured, but the extraordinary determination of one family who refused to stop searching when everyone else had given up hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Morrison family saga began in the small settlement of Willow Creek, a farming community of approximately 40 households nestled in the rolling hills of eastern Pennsylvania. The year was 1834, and America was still finding its identity, caught between the agricultural traditions of its past and the Industrial Revolution reshaping its future. The Morrisons were neither wealthy nor influential by the standards of their time, simply a hard-working family of modest means who had settled in Willow Creek 5 years earlier. James Morrison, a carpenter by trade, had moved his family from Philadelphia, seeking the cleaner air and open spaces of rural Pennsylvania. His wife, Elizabeth, a former schoolteacher, homeschooled their 3 children while maintaining their small farmhouse. Their eldest son, Thomas, 16 at the time our story begins, was known throughout the community for his keen observational skills and quiet determination. The middle child, Sarah, 14 and fearless, possessed a natural talent for making people open up and share their secrets. The youngest, William, just 9 years old, had an uncanny ability to squeeze into small spaces that adults couldn't access, a skill that would prove invaluable in the events to come. The Morrisons were relative newcomers to Willow Creek, but they had quickly become respected members of the community. James's carpentry skills were in high demand, while Elizabeth's previous experience as a teacher made her a valuable resource for families wanting additional education for their children. The Morrison children were well-behaved and industrious, often helping neighbors with chores or errands. By all accounts, they were an ordinary family, the kind that forms the backbone of any community without drawing particular attention. What set the Morrisons apart wasn't wealth or status, but rather an unusual family philosophy that James and Elizabeth had instilled in their children from an early age. "Look deeper," James would often tell them. "What you see isn't always what exists." Elizabeth reinforced this idea, teaching her children to question, observe, and investigate rather than simply accepting the world as it appeared. This philosophy, born from James's experiences during his brief service as a constable in Philadelphia, would ultimately save dozens of lives. Willow Creek in 1834 was typical of rural Pennsylvania settlements of the era. Most residents farmed the fertile soil, growing corn, wheat, and vegetables while raising livestock for meat and dairy. The town center consisted of Willow Creek General Store, operated by the Bailey family for 3 generations. A one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a church on Sundays. A blacksmith shop run by the stern but fair Isaiah Cooper. And a small tavern where farmers gathered to discuss crops and politics. Life in Willow Creek followed the predictable rhythms of agricultural communities. Planting in spring, tending through summer, harvesting in fall, and surviving the harsh winters that isolated the community for weeks at a time. Neighbors relied on each other for survival, sharing resources and labor through difficult times. This interdependence created a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else, or at least thought they did. The abandoned church that would later become the center of the investigation sat on a wooded hill approximately 1 mile outside of town. St. Michael's Church, built in the 1780s by the area's first European settlers, had been vacant since 1829. When the congregation built a newer, larger church closer to town, the old stone building, with its weathered gray walls and broken stained glass windows, was largely forgotten, occasionally visited by curious children or used as shelter by travelers passing through the area. Few people gave much thought to the abandoned church. Local children told ghost stories about it, claiming to hear organ music on moonlit nights or seeing shadowy figures through the broken windows. These stories were dismissed by adults as childish imagination, though many found themselves walking a little faster when passing the building after dark. What no one realized was that beneath the seemingly abandoned structure lay a complex of rooms and tunnels that housed secrets darker than any ghost story. The events that would lead to the discovery began on a crisp October morning in 1834. 10-year-old Emma Bailey, daughter of the general store owner, left home to deliver a package to a farm on the outskirts of town. It was a routine errand she had performed many times before, a 20-minute walk along a well-traveled road. When Emma failed to return after several hours, her parents became concerned. By nightfall, the entire community was searching the woods and fields surrounding Willow Creek, calling Emma's name and carrying lanterns against the gathering darkness. James Morrison joined the search immediately, bringing Thomas with him while Elizabeth stayed home with Sarah and William. As a former constable, James approached the search methodically, questioning everyone who might have seen Emma that morning and carefully examining the road she would have traveled. It was Thomas who made the first significant observation, noticing fresh wagon tracks turning off the main road toward the abandoned church. When he pointed these out, most of the searchers dismissed them. The old church road was occasionally used by hunters or woodcutters. But James, true to his family philosophy, decided to look deeper. Father and son followed the tracks to St. Michael's Church, arriving just as night was falling completely. The building stood dark and silent against the starry sky, giving no hint of recent visitors. A quick examination of the exterior revealed nothing unusual until Thomas spotted a padlock on the front door, new and shining in contrast to the weathered wood. The old church had never been locked during the 5 years the Morrisons had lived in Willow Creek. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When James returned to town to report this finding, he was met with skepticism. Sheriff Patrick Donovan, an older man nearing retirement, suggested that the church trustees had probably secured the building to prevent vandalism. Reverend Thomas Clark, who led the congregation that had once worshipped at St. Michael's, confirmed that the building was still church property, but denied any knowledge of a new lock. With most of the search party focusing on the woods and stream where children typically played, James found himself with little support for investigating the church further. The Morrison family, however, was not easily deterred. That night, gathered around their kitchen table, they formulated a plan. While the official search continued throughout the surrounding countryside, the Morrisons would conduct their own investigation of St. Michael's Church. Elizabeth, drawing on her organized mind, created a list of questions. Who had placed the new lock? Why secure an abandoned building now after years of neglect? Were the wagon tracks related to Emma's disappearance, or merely coincidence? The following morning, James reported to Sheriff Donovan that he would be searching farther afield, then doubled back with his entire family towards St. Michael's Church. Each Morrison had a specific role in their investigation. James and Thomas would examine the church exterior for any signs of recent activity. Elizabeth would record their findings and observations in her precise handwriting. Sarah would speak with the nearest neighbors, using her friendly manner to gather information without raising suspicions. And young William, with his ability to squeeze through tight spaces, would be their secret weapon if they found a way to enter the locked building. What they discovered over the next several hours confirmed James's suspicions that something was very wrong at the old church. The wagon tracks Thomas had spotted weren't isolated, similar tracks appeared regularly in the soft earth around the building, suggesting frequent visits. Several windows on the ground floor had been carefully boarded from the inside, not haphazardly as would be expected in an abandoned building. Most tellingly, they found a small opening in the foundation at the rear of the church, a broken stone that created a gap, just large enough for William to wriggle through. With careful instructions from his parents and a small lantern to light his way, William Morrison became the first person in years to see the interior of St. Michael's Church with clear, observant eyes. What he found inside would lead to the rescue of 31 children and the unraveling of a criminal enterprise that had operated unchallenged for over a decade. William's exploration revealed that the church interior had been transformed. The once open sanctuary was now divided into smaller rooms using wooden partitions. The pews had been removed, replaced by tables covered with papers and ledgers. Most significantly, William discovered a trapdoor in the floor near where the altar had once stood, heavy and secured with multiple locks. Unable to open it, he completed his examination of the ground floor, collecting a folded paper that had fallen behind one of the tables before squeezing back through the foundation gap to report to his family. The paper William retrieved was a list of names with dates and amounts, seemingly ordinary until Elizabeth recognized Emma Bailey's name at the bottom, dated just 2 days earlier. Next to her name was written, "Acquisition complete, transport pending." The implications were horrifying, but the Morrisons needed more evidence before approaching the sheriff again. They needed to know what lay beneath that trapdoor. Their investigation continued over the next 3 days, with different family members taking turns watching the church from a hidden position in the surrounding woods. Their patience was rewarded when, shortly before dawn on the 4th day, a wagon arrived driven by a well-dressed man the Morrisons had never seen before. The stranger unlocked the church, disappeared inside for approximately 20 minutes, then emerged with a small blanket-wrapped bundle that he placed in the wagon before driving away toward the main road to Philadelphia. James immediately suspected that the bundle might be Emma Bailey or another child. He faced an impossible choice: follow the wagon or investigate the church while it was unlocked. In a decision that would save dozens of lives, the Morrisons split up. James and Thomas followed the wagon while Elizabeth, Sarah, and William returned to the church. With the door now unlocked, Elizabeth and her children entered cautiously. Sarah stood watch at the door while Elizabeth and William located the trapdoor William had seen earlier. It was indeed secured with multiple locks, but in his haste, the stranger had left a ring of keys on a nearby table. With trembling hands, Elizabeth tried each key until the locks opened. What they found beneath St. Michael's Church would haunt their dreams for years to come. A series of underground chambers had been excavated, extending far beyond the footprint of the church above. These rooms, lit by oil lamps that cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, contained small cots arranged in rows. And on many of these cots were children, ranging in age from 4 to 17, some sleeping, others watching with fearful eyes as Elizabeth descended the wooden stairs. The first child to speak was a girl of about 12, who asked in a whisper if Elizabeth was one of them or if she had come to help. When Elizabeth assured her that help had arrived, the girl revealed that her name was Lucy and that she had been taken from her family in Baltimore almost 2 years earlier. Lucy explained that the collectors, as the children called their captors, traveled throughout Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York, targeting children who wouldn't be immediately missed: the poor, the orphaned, those from troubled families. As Sarah joined them underground, the two Morrison women began to understand the full scope of the operation. The chambers housed 31 children in total, including Emma Bailey, who was being kept in a separate room reserved for new acquisitions. The children were not physically restrained, but were controlled through a combination of fear, isolation, and psychological manipulation. They had been told that their families had sold them, that the outside world was searching for them to punish them for imagined crimes, or simply that no one cared enough to look for them. The operation was sophisticated and methodical. Children were acquired, held temporarily at St. Michael's Church, then processed, given new identities, and transported to various locations throughout the eastern states. Some were sold as servants or laborers to wealthy households. Others were sent to factories where child workers were in demand. The most disturbing cases, according to the older children, involved those selected for special clients, a phrase that made Elizabeth's blood run cold. While Elizabeth and Sarah were discovering the underground chambers, James and Thomas were following the wagon toward Philadelphia. After several miles, the wagon turned onto a private drive leading to an elegant mansion set back from the road. James and Thomas watched from the cover of trees as the driver carried the blanket-wrapped bundle inside. Through a stroke of luck, or perhaps divine intervention, as Elizabeth would later suggest, they overheard the driver conversing with another man about the next shipment scheduled for the following week. The men mentioned additional collection points in Lancaster, York, and Baltimore. The Morrisons now had evidence of a widespread criminal operation involving the abduction and trafficking of children. They faced a critical decision: attempt to rescue the children immediately or seek official help. Elizabeth, always practical, recognized that they couldn't safely transport 31 children without assistance. James, with his experience as a constable, knew that they needed legal authority to proceed. They needed Sheriff Donovan. Convincing the sheriff proved more difficult than expected. When James and Thomas returned to Willow Creek and shared their discoveries with Donovan, he was skeptical. The idea that an organized group was abducting children and holding them beneath an abandoned church seemed far-fetched. The suggestion that respectable citizens might be involved in purchasing these children was even harder to believe. It wasn't until Elizabeth arrived with Sarah and young Lucy, the 12-year-old who had first spoken to them in the underground chambers, that Donovan began to take their claims seriously. Lucy's testimony was compelling and heartbreaking. She described in detail how she had been approached by a kind-seeming woman in Baltimore who offered her food and a warm place to sleep. Having run away from an abusive stepfather, Lucy accepted. Readily, she awoke in a wagon, drugged and confused, and was brought to St. Michael's Church. There, she joined dozens of other children who had arrived in similar circumstances. Lucy's clear recollection of dates, names, and procedures convinced Sheriff Donovan that the Morrisons had indeed uncovered something terrible. With the sheriff now believing their story, a rescue operation was quickly organized. Donovan deputized James and several other trusted men from Willow Creek. The local doctor, Frederick Schmidt, was called to assist with any children needing medical attention. By mid-afternoon, a group of 15 armed men approached St. Michael's Church, led by Sheriff Donovan and guided by the Morrison family. The rescue itself was anticlimactic compared to the investigation that led to it. The church was empty of adults when the rescue party arrived, though a man identified as Peter Simmons, a supposed traveling salesman who had visited Willow Creek regularly for years, was apprehended when he arrived during the evacuation of the children. The evidence found within the church was overwhelming: ledgers detailing the purchase and sale of children, correspondence with buyers throughout the eastern states, and even a crude map showing other collection points in neighboring counties. The children were brought to Willow Creek, where the community quickly mobilized to provide food, clothing, and temporary shelter. Dr. Schmidt examined each child, documenting their condition for future legal proceedings. The physical state of the children varied widely. Some, like Emma Bailey, who had been there only days, showed little physical trauma. Others bore signs of prolonged malnutrition, with thin limbs and hollow eyes that spoke of months or years of inadequate care. As news of the discovery spread, families began arriving in Willow Creek from throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states, desperate to find children who had disappeared months or even years earlier. The joyful reunions were tempered by the realization that many children had no families to return to. They were truly orphans, or had been taken so young that they no longer remembered their origins. The investigation expanded rapidly as Sheriff Donovan shared his findings with authorities in Philadelphia. The ledgers found at St. Michael's Church implicated dozens of individuals, including several prominent citizens. The special clients Lucy had mentioned turned out to be wealthy families who had purchased children as unpaid servants, businessmen who used child labor in their factories, and in a few horrifying cases, individuals with more sinister motives. Peter Simmons, the only captor apprehended during the initial rescue, initially refused to cooperate with investigators. His silence broke when faced with the testimonies of 31 children and the meticulous records found at the church. Simmons revealed that he was a low-level operative in an organization that had been operating throughout the eastern United States for over 15 years. The collectors, as the children called them, targeted vulnerable children, runaways, orphans, and those from desperately poor families who might not be immediately missed or whose disappearances might not generate extensive searches. The most disturbing aspect of Simmons's testimony was how ordinary the operation's methods were. The abandoned church had been chosen specifically because it was ignored but not forgotten. An occasional visitor wouldn't raise suspicions the way activity at a truly abandoned building might. The collectors maintained respectable covers. Simmons himself was genuinely a traveling salesman, though his trade in household goods was merely a front for his primary occupation. The organization's success relied on the community's tendency to look without seeing, to accept simple explanations for troubling observations. As the investigation progressed, more children were rescued from other locations identified in the St. Michael's records. A former schoolhouse in Lancaster County, a supposedly abandoned mine in York, a farm outside Baltimore where children were kept in converted storage cellars. In total, 78 children were freed from captivity, though authorities believed that hundreds more had already been processed and sold before the operation was discovered. The legal proceedings that followed were unprecedented in Pennsylvania history. 27 individuals were eventually arrested for their involvement in the child trafficking ring. The trials, held in Philadelphia throughout 1835, attracted national attention. Newspapers from as far away as Boston and Charleston sent reporters to cover what one editorial called a crime so monstrous as to defy belief, were it not for the overwhelming evidence and testimony. The Morrison family became reluctant celebrities. James was offered positions in law enforcement in several major cities, but declined them all, preferring to return to his carpentry work in Willow Creek. Elizabeth, drawing on her teaching background, established a school specifically for rescued children who had nowhere else to go. Thomas, Sarah, and William found themselves the subject of stories that portrayed them as heroes, though they insisted they had simply done what anyone would do. When faced with such a situation, perhaps the most significant outcome of the Morrison family's investigation was the establishment of the Pennsylvania Children's Protection Society in 1836, founded with donations from citizens outraged by the St. Michael's Church case. The society was dedicated to advocating for laws protecting children from exploitation and abuse. Elizabeth Morrison served on its first board of directors, bringing her first-hand experience with the rescued children to bear on the society's policies and recommendations. The legacy of the Morrison family's courage extended far beyond Pennsylvania. The case led to the first comprehensive child protection laws in American history. establishing precedents that would eventually spread throughout the nation. The systematic approach to investigation that James had developed during his time as a constable, combined with the Morrison family philosophy of looking deeper, became a model for how communities could protect their most vulnerable members. The children rescued from St. Michael's Church and the other collection points faced long journeys of recovery. Some, reunited with loving families, gradually reclaimed their interrupted childhoods. Others, with no homes to return to, found new families through adoption or created family-like bonds with fellow survivors. A few, too damaged by their experiences to fully reintegrate into society, required lifelong care and support. Lucy, the 12-year-old whose testimony had helped convince Sheriff Donovan of the Morrisons' claims, was among those who stayed with Elizabeth at her school. She eventually became a teacher herself, specializing in working with traumatized children. In her later writings, Lucy credited the Morrison family with not just saving her life, but with showing her that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to ignore what was right in front of them. As the years passed, the abandoned church that had housed so much suffering was not forgotten or ignored again. The building was eventually demolished, the underground chambers filled with concrete, and a memorial garden planted on the site. A simple stone marker told visitors, "In memory of the children of St. Michael's and the Morrison family who refused to stop looking." The memorial became a place of reflection for the community, a reminder of both the darkness that can hide behind ordinary facades and the light that comes when people choose to see clearly. The story of the Morrison family and the basement where 31 children disappeared continues to resonate nearly 2 centuries later. It reminds us that evil often succeeds not because good people approve, but because they fail to look deeply enough at the world around them. It teaches us that ordinary families can achieve extraordinary things when they trust their instincts and refuse to accept simple explanations for troubling observations. Most importantly, it shows us that the courage to look deeper, to see what truly exists rather than what merely appears to be, can change the course of history and save the lives of those who have no other hope. Before we continue with more details about the Morrison family's investigation and the children they saved, I want to ask you something important. This channel isn't for everyone. It's for those who understand that beneath the surface of ordinary history lie extraordinary stories of courage and evil. If you've made it this far, you're someone who values knowing the full truth, no matter how disturbing or inspiring it might be. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of history explorers. And tell me in the comments, what state are you watching from? Are there forgotten stories from your area waiting to be uncovered? What the Morrisons discovered about the operations at St. Michael's Church revealed an organization far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The underground chambers weren't merely holding cells. They represented an entire system designed to process children like commodities. Each chamber served a specific purpose in what Peter Simmons, under intense questioning, called the preparation pipeline. The first chamber, where new arrivals like Emma Bailey were kept, focused on breaking down resistance. Children were isolated, deprived of regular meals and sleep, and told repeatedly that they had been abandoned or sold by their families. Those who continued to resist were shown forged letters supposedly from their parents, disowning them or expressing relief at their disappearance. This psychological manipulation typically lasted between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the child's resilience. The second chamber housed children who had accepted their situation but required training before they could be sold. Here, they learned to respond to new names, to suppress their true histories, and to perform whatever tasks their future owners might require. The children were classified according to their potential uses: domestic service, factory work, farm labor, or the mysterious special assignments that even Simmons claimed not to fully understand. The third chamber, which Elizabeth Morrison described as the showroom, was where potential buyers could examine the children before completing their purchases. This room was more carefully maintained, with better bedding and lighting. Children selected for viewing were cleaned up, given decent clothes, and coached on how to present themselves. Those who performed well during these inspections were rewarded with extra food or small privileges. Those who failed to impress might be returned to the training chamber, or worse, marked for alternative placement. The ledgers found at St. Michael's contained meticulous records of every child who had passed through the system since its establishment in 1823. Names, ages, physical descriptions, aptitudes, and prices, all documented with chilling efficiency. The organization had processed over 400 children in that decade, generating profits estimated at more than $100,000, an astronomical sum for the time period. The financial success of the operation explained the resources invested in its infrastructure and the risks its operators were willing to take. Sheriff Donovan's investigation revealed connections that reached far beyond Willow Creek. The abandoned church was just one node in a network that stretched from Boston to Charleston. Similar facilities had been established in rural areas throughout the eastern states, all following the same model: isolated locations, respected cover identities for the operators, and careful attention to avoiding local suspicion. The organization had infiltrated orphanages, poorhouses, and even some local governments, bribing officials to ignore disappearances or to provide documentation for their human merchandise. What made the St. Michael's operation particularly insidious was its connection to respectable society. The buyers weren't just criminal elements or isolated degenerates. They included wealthy families, business owners, and even a few government officials. The ledgers contained coded references to a state senator, 2 prominent Philadelphia merchants, and several New York industrialists. These connections had provided protection for the operation, ensuring that any suspicions were quickly dismissed by authorities. As the investigation expanded, the Morrison family faced unexpected challenges. Anonymous threats began arriving at their home in Willow Creek. Windows were broken in the middle of the night. Their horse was found with its mane and tail cut off. A clear warning. James insisted that his family continue their normal routines, but with added precautions. Thomas and Sarah were never allowed to go anywhere alone. William was kept close to home. Elizabeth carried a small pistol concealed in her skirts, unusual for a woman of her time and position, but a necessary adaptation to their new reality. The community's response to these intimidation tactics was heartening. Neighbors organized a rotation to watch over the Morrison home. The blacksmith, Isaiah Cooper, installed heavy shutters on their windows and reinforced their doors. Sheriff Donovan assigned a deputy to patrol near their property. The threats represented the desperate attempts of cornered criminals to silence witnesses, but they only succeeded in strengthening the community's resolve to protect the family who had exposed such evil. The most significant threat came 3 weeks after the initial rescue, when Thomas Morrison was returning from delivering a message to Sheriff Donovan. 2 men in dark clothing attempted to drag him into a carriage on the outskirts of town. Thomas, at 16 already tall and strong from years of helping with his father's carpentry, fought back with unexpected ferocity. His shouts alerted a nearby farmer, and the would-be kidnappers fled. The incident confirmed that powerful people were deeply concerned about what the investigation might reveal about their involvement. Despite these dangers, the Morrisons remained committed to seeing the case through to its conclusion. Elizabeth worked tirelessly with the rescued children, gaining their trust and recording their stories. James assisted Sheriff Donovan and the Philadelphia authorities, providing his insights as both a former constable and the man who had first recognized the significance of the new padlock on an abandoned church. Thomas, Sarah, and William continued to support the investigation in their own ways. Thomas with his observational skills, Sarah with her ability to comfort traumatized children, and William with his uncanny memory for details that adults might overlook. The children's testimonies painted a picture of an organization that had refined its methods over years of operation. The collectors targeted specific types of children. Not just any vulnerable child would do. They looked for intelligence, adaptability, and physical characteristics that would appeal to their clients. Children were evaluated like livestock, with prices varying based on their potential usefulness. A healthy, intelligent 12-year-old girl might bring $300 or more from a wealthy family seeking a lifetime servant. A strong boy of 14 could command $250 from a factory owner looking for cheap labor. The ledgers showed that special placements, the designation that made investigators most uncomfortable, could bring $500 or more. Lucy's testimony proved particularly valuable as the case moved toward prosecution. Unlike many of the rescued children, she had maintained a clear sense of her own identity throughout her captivity. She remembered names, dates, and procedures with remarkable precision. She could identify several of the collectors by sight and recalled conversations that implicated numerous buyers. Most importantly, Lucy had developed her own system of resistance, pretending compliance while carefully observing and remembering everything around her. Her testimony would prove crucial in securing convictions for 15 of the 27 individuals eventually arrested. The trials began in Philadelphia in January 1835. The first to face justice was Peter Simmons, collector apprehended during the rescue at St. Michael's Church. His trial established the pattern for those that would follow. The prosecution presented the physical evidence found at the church, the ledgers, correspondence, and maps. They called children to testify about their experiences, with Lucy's composed and detailed account making a particularly strong impression on the jury. James Morrison described the investigation that had led to the discovery, while Elizabeth provided expert testimony on the psychological state of the rescued children. The defense attempted to portray Simmons as a minor participant who hadn't understood the true nature of the operation. This strategy collapsed when the prosecution introduced letters in Simmons's own handwriting, describing the acquisition of specific children and negotiating their prices with buyers. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury found Simmons guilty on all counts. The judge, expressing his revulsion at the evidence presented, sentenced Simmons to 20 years of hard labor, the maximum penalty available under Pennsylvania law at that time. Subsequent trials followed similar patterns, though each revealed new aspects of the criminal enterprise. A Philadelphia physician was convicted of examining children to assess their health and value before sale. A respected Baltimore businessman was exposed as the financial backer who had provided the initial capital for the operation. A former church deacon admitted to selecting St. Michael's as the ideal location and overseeing the construction of the underground chambers. With each conviction, the extent and sophistication of the network became clearer. The most sensational trial involved State Senator George Hammond, whose name had appeared in coded form in the St. Michael's ledgers. Hammond had purchased 3 children over a 5-year period, supposedly as domestic servants for his country estate. Investigation revealed that none of these children could be accounted for, and former staff members testified to seeing children arrive at the estate only to disappear weeks or months later. Hammond's political connections nearly allowed him to escape justice. The governor himself attempted to intervene in the case, but the evidence was too compelling to dismiss. Hammond's conviction and 10-year sentence sent shockwaves through Pennsylvania society and put other wealthy clients of the network on notice that their status would not protect them. Throughout the trials, the Morrison family maintained their dignity and focus. They testified when required, supported the children, who had to face their captors in court, and continued their efforts to help the survivors rebuild their lives. Elizabeth School had grown to accommodate 28 children who either had no families to return to or whose psychological trauma made immediate reintegration impossible. James had expanded their home, building additional rooms to house teachers and caregivers. Thomas, now 17, had become something of an assistant investigator to Sheriff Donovan, while Sarah and William helped at the school. The national attention brought by the trials led to unexpected opportunities for the Morrisons to extend their impact. Elizabeth was invited to address the Pennsylvania legislature regarding proposed child protection laws. Her testimony, informed by months of working with the rescued children, helped shape legislation that would become a model for other states. James consulted with law enforcement agencies from New York to Virginia, sharing his methods of investigation and his insights into how criminal enterprises could hide in plain sight within respectable communities. Perhaps the most significant development came in March 1835, when the Morrisons were invited to meet with President Andrew Jackson during his visit to Philadelphia. The president, known for his tough personality, was visibly moved by their account of the investigation and rescue. He promised federal support for efforts to dismantle similar operations throughout the country, and directed the newly formed Department of Justice to prioritize cases involving crimes against children. While Jackson's administration had many controversial aspects, historians generally agree that the meeting with the Morrison family influenced his perspective on the federal government's role in protecting vulnerable citizens. The trials concluded in November 1835 with 22 convictions and 5 acquittals. The sentences ranged from 5 years to Hammond's 20 years, depending on the level of involvement and the specific charges proven. The acquittals were disappointing, but not surprising. Some participants had been careful to maintain plausible deniability, and certain records had been destroyed before they could be seized as evidence. Still, the overall success of the prosecution sent a clear message that crimes against children would be taken seriously, regardless of the perpetrator's social standing. With the legal proceedings complete, the Morrisons faced a decision about their future. They had received offers from various cities to establish similar schools for vulnerable children or to join law enforcement agencies specializing in missing persons cases. After much family discussion, they chose to remain in Willow Creek, continuing the work they had begun while maintaining the community connections that had sustained them through the investigation and trials. Elizabeth School, initially established as a temporary measure, evolved into a permanent institution, the Morrison Home for Children. With financial support from donors throughout the state and a small government stipend, the home provided education, vocational training, and psychological support for children who had been victimized or abandoned. Elizabeth developed innovative methods for helping traumatized children recover, combining structured learning with creative expression and practical skills development. Her approaches, documented in a series of articles published in educational journals, influenced childcare practices throughout the country. James returned to carpentry but maintained his connection to law enforcement as a special consultant to the Pennsylvania State Constabulary. He helped develop training programs for officers investigating crimes against children, emphasizing the importance of observation, community knowledge, and skepticism toward too convenient explanations. His manual, Investigation Beyond Appearance, became standard reading for law enforcement officers throughout the eastern states. The Morrison children followed their own paths, each shaped by their experiences during the St. Michael's investigation. Thomas, combining his father's methodical approach with his own keen observational skills, eventually joined the newly formed Pinkerton Detective Agency, specializing in cases involving missing persons. Sarah studied medicine, unusual for a woman of her time, and became one of the first physicians to specialize in treating psychological trauma in children. William, the youngest, grew up to become an architect known for designing schools and orphanages that prioritized children's safety and well-being. The children rescued from St. Michael's and the other collection points faced varied futures. Those reunited with their families often struggled with trust issues and nightmares, though being back in loving environments helped many heal over time. Those who remained at the Morrison home generally fared well under Elizabeth's care, though some carried the scars of their experiences throughout their lives. A few, like Lucy, transformed their trauma into purpose, dedicating themselves to preventing others from suffering similar fates. Lucy's story deserves special attention, as it exemplifies both the horror of what the children endured and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. After testifying at the trials, Lucy remained at the Morrison home, where Elizabeth recognized her natural leadership abilities and intellectual gifts. With Elizabeth's encouragement, Lucy completed her education and became the home's first graduate. To attend college, studying at the Female Medical College of Pennsylvania, later known as Woman's Medical College. She became a physician specializing in children's health, eventually returning to the Morrison home as its medical director. In her medical practice, Lucy pioneered approaches to treating what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Drawing on her own experiences and those of the other survivors, she developed techniques for helping children process traumatic memories without being overwhelmed by them. Her methods combined traditional medical care with emotional support, physical activity, and creative expression. Lucy's work, published in medical journals beginning in the 1850s, helped establish childhood trauma as a legitimate field of medical study decades before the formal recognition of psychological trauma as a medical condition. The most enduring legacy of the Morrison family and the children of St. Michael's may be the fundamental changes they inspired in how American society viewed its obligations to protect children. Before 1835, children were largely considered the property of their parents or guardians, with few legal protections against exploitation or abuse. The St. Michael's case highlighted the vulnerability of children outside the protection of functional families and demonstrated the need for systematic approaches to child welfare. The Pennsylvania Children's Protection Act of 1836, drafted with substantial input from Elizabeth Morrison, established precedents that would eventually be adopted throughout the nation. The act created a system for investigating reports of child abuse or exploitation, established standards for orphanages and children's homes, and provided for the appointment of guardians for children without proper parental care. Most significantly, it explicitly recognized that children had rights independent of their parents or guardians, a revolutionary concept for the time. The Morrison Home for Children operated continuously from 1835 until 1923, when it was incorporated into the Pennsylvania State Child Care System. During its nearly 90 years of independent operation, it provided care and education for over 3,000 children. Its approaches to trauma-informed care, education for disadvantaged children, and community integration became models for similar institutions throughout the country. Many of its graduates went on to careers in education, medicine, law enforcement, and child advocacy, extending the home's influence far beyond its walls. Today, visitors to Willow Creek can tour the Morrison Family Museum, housed in the family's original farmhouse, which has been preserved and restored to its 1830s appearance. The museum tells the story of how one ordinary family's willingness to look deeper changed the course of American child welfare. The Morrison Home's main building now serves as the administrative center for the Pennsylvania Children's Services, a fitting tribute to Elizabeth's pioneering work. And on the site where St. Michael's Church once stood, the memorial garden continues to remind visitors of both the darkness that humans can inflict upon one another and the courage required to bring that darkness into light. If this story has inspired you, you understand why these forgotten chapters of American history deserve to be remembered. Just when we think we've heard every tale of courage, stories like the Morrison family remind us that ordinary people have always been capable of extraordinary heroism when children's lives are at stake. If you're feeling moved by this account, Share this video with someone who appreciates stories of everyday heroes. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to discover more hidden histories. Let's explore together what other inspiring tales lie buried in America's past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.